I never thought I would become the kind of person who marks his firewood with invisible UV ink. But living in the Pinecrest Meadows HOA in Boulder, Colorado had turned me into exactly that kind of paranoid homeowner. My name is Keith Ellison, and I am a 42-year-old software engineer who works from home and likes to keep to himself. I bought my house 3 years ago thinking I had found the perfect quiet neighborhood with mountain views and friendly neighbors. For the first 6 months, everything was great. Then Patricia Whitmore became the HOA president, and my life became a bureaucratic nightmare filled with citations, fines, and constant surveillance. Patricia was everything you would expect from a HOA Karen. She was 53 years old with the signature blonde bob haircut that somehow defied gravity, always wore pastel cardigans even in summer, and drove a white Lexus SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "My other car is also my business." She had moved to Colorado from California 2 years before I arrived, bought the largest house in the development, and immediately began her campaign to control every aspect of neighborhood life. The firewood situation started last October when I decided to install a wood-burning stove in my living room. Colorado winters can be brutal, and I liked the idea of having a backup heat source that also created ambience. I hired a licensed contractor, got all the necessary permits, and made sure everything was up to code. The installation cost me nearly $8,000, but I figured it would pay for itself in a few years with reduced heating bills. I ordered 3 cords of premium split oak and maple from a supplier in Netherlands, about 20 miles west of Boulder. The wood was properly seasoned, cut to perfect 16-inch lengths, and delivered on a Saturday morning in late October. I spent the entire weekend stacking it neatly in my backyard against the fence, covered with a heavy-duty tarp to keep it dry. The pile was roughly 8 feet long, 4 feet high, and looked like something from a magazine photo about rustic mountain living. That first winter with the wood stove was incredible. I would work from my home office during the day, and in the evenings I would build a fire, pour myself a bourbon, and relax while watching the flames. The heat was different from forced air, more comforting somehow. I felt like I had finally created the mountain retreat I had always wanted, but Patricia noticed the firewood immediately. The first citation arrived 3 days after the delivery. According to her interpretation of the HOA bylaws, firewood stacks could not exceed 3 feet in height and had to be stored at least 15 feet from any property line. My stack was 4 feet high and about 6 feet from the back fence. The fine was $50. I attended the next HOA meeting to contest the citation. There were maybe 15 other homeowners there, most of them looking as exhausted and defeated as I felt. Patricia sat at the head table with her reading glasses perched on her nose and a 3-ring binder thick enough to be a weapon. "The rules are clearly stated in Section 12, subsection 4 of the Community Guidelines," she said, not even looking up from her papers. "Firewood storage must comply with aesthetic standards and setback requirements." "Those rules were written in 1998, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "They are completely arbitrary. My firewood does not affect anyone, and it is barely visible from the street." "Rules are rules, Keith," Patricia said, finally looking at me with a condescending smile. "If we let one person violate the guidelines, then everyone will want to do whatever they please. That is how neighborhoods fall apart." I ended up paying the $50 fine and restacking my firewood to meet her ridiculous specifications. It took me another full day of work, and the new arrangement was less stable and harder to access. But I told myself it was not worth fighting over. That should have been the end of it, but Patricia seemed to have developed a personal vendetta against me. Over the next few months, I received citations for leaving my trash cans visible from the street more than 2 hours after collection, for planting flowers in a color scheme that did not complement my house paint, and for parking my truck in my driveway instead of my garage. Each citation came with a fine ranging from $25 to $100. By March, I had paid nearly $700 in HOA fines. I consulted with a real estate attorney who told me that while Patricia's interpretations were aggressive, they were technically within her authority as HOA president. Fighting it would cost me more in legal fees than just paying the fines. I felt trapped in my own home. Winter ended, and I did not need the wood stove anymore. I still had about half a cord of wood left, which I kept neatly stacked in the same spot in my backyard. I figured I would use it next winter. The wood had cost me nearly $600 total, and properly seasoned firewood only gets better with age if you store it correctly. Then came late August, and I started preparing for the next heating season. I went out to my backyard one Sunday morning to check on the wood and make sure the tarp was still secure. That is when I noticed something was wrong. The pile looked smaller, significantly smaller. I pulled back the tarp and counted the rows. I had definitely lost wood. At least a quarter of what remained was gone, maybe 15 or 20 pieces. I looked around my yard, thinking maybe some pieces had fallen and rolled away, but there was nothing. Someone had taken my firewood. My first thought was maybe neighborhood kids or someone passing through, but that did not make sense. My backyard was fenced, and the gate was always locked. You would have to specifically come onto my property with the intention of taking the wood. That would be trespassing and theft. I decided to keep an eye on the situation. Maybe it was a one-time thing. But 2 weeks later I checked again and more wood was missing. Another 20 pieces at least. Now I was angry. This was not random. Someone was deliberately stealing my firewood on a regular basis. I considered installing security cameras, but I knew Patricia would probably cite me for that too. The HOA had rules about visible surveillance equipment. Then, I remembered something from my college days. My roommate had been a chemistry major, and he once showed me UV reactive ink that was completely invisible under normal light, but glowed bright green under blacklight. He had used it to mark his textbooks after someone kept stealing them from the library. I ordered a bottle of UV reactive ink online and a small blacklight flashlight. When they arrived, I spent an entire evening in my backyard, carefully marking every single piece of remaining firewood with my initials. Key. I made the letters small and neat, placing them on the end grain of each piece where they would not be obvious even if someone looked closely. Under normal daylight, you could not see the marks at all. But when I shined the blacklight on them, my initials glowed bright green. I felt a little silly doing it, like I was setting up some elaborate spy operation over firewood. But I was tired of being victimized. If someone was stealing from me, I wanted proof. 3 weeks passed, and I checked the pile every few days. Nothing seemed to change. I started to think maybe the marking had scared off whoever was taking the wood, even though logically they could not have known about it. Then, in mid-September, I noticed more wood missing, at least 30 pieces this time. I was furious. That Saturday, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood with my dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit. I did not really have a plan, but I thought maybe I would notice something suspicious. We walked the usual route past the community mailboxes, around the small park with the playground, and down the main street that curved through the development. That is when I saw it. 3 houses down from mine, in Patricia Whitmore's backyard, clearly visible from the sidewalk, was a neat stack of firewood next to a new outdoor fire pit. The wood looked exactly like mine. Same size splits, same mix of oak and maple with the distinctive reddish tint of the maple pieces. My heart started pounding. Patricia had been stealing my firewood. The HOA president who fined me for every tiny violation was a thief. I walked Biscuit home as calmly as I could, then grabbed my Blacklight flashlight. I waited until evening when it was dark enough for the UV light to be visible. Then I walked back to Patricia's house, trying to look casual, just a neighbor out for an evening stroll. Her house was set back from the street, but the fire pit and wood stack were in the side yard, visible from the sidewalk and not too far from the property line. I could see lights on inside the house. I walked up to the edge of her property, staying on the public sidewalk, and shined my Blacklight toward the wood stack. My initials glowed bright green on piece after piece. Key. At least 50 pieces of my firewood, probably more. I could not believe what I was seeing. Patricia had not just taken a few pieces. She had systematically stolen hundreds of dollars worth of my firewood over the course of weeks. I took out my phone and started taking photos and videos, making sure to capture the glowing UV marks clearly. I documented at least 20 pieces from different angles, zooming in to show my initials. My hands were shaking with anger and adrenaline. Then Patricia's front door opened, and she stepped out onto her porch. "Keith, what are you doing out there?" she called out, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Just walking," I said, quickly pocketing the flashlight and my phone. "Nice fire pit you have there." "Thank you," she said, coming down her porch steps toward me. She was wearing a lavender tracksuit and white sneakers. I had it installed last month, perfect for entertaining. "Where did you get all that firewood?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I ordered it from a supplier," she said, crossing her arms. "Why? Just curious. It looks a lot like the wood I bought. Same cuts, same mix." Patricia's expression hardened. "Are you accusing me of something?" "No," I lied. "Just making conversation. Good night, Patricia." I walked away before she could say anything else, my mind racing. I had evidence now, clear evidence that she had stolen my property. But what was I supposed to do with it? Call the police? Would they even take a firewood theft seriously? And Patricia had connections in the community. She was friendly with the mayor, served on multiple town committees, and had a reputation as an upstanding citizen and neighborhood watchdog. I spent the entire night researching Colorado theft laws. What Patricia had done was definitely illegal. In Colorado, theft of property valued between $50 and $300 is a Class 2 misdemeanor, punishable by up to 364 days in jail and fines up to $1,000. The wood she had stolen was probably worth around $200, right in that range. I also looked up trespassing laws. By entering my fenced backyard without permission to take the wood, Patricia had committed criminal trespassing, which was a separate offense. The next morning, I printed out all my photos showing the UV marks under Blacklight. I also gathered my receipts from purchasing the firewood and the UV ink, along with a detailed written timeline of when I noticed the wood going missing and when I discovered it at Patricia's house. Then I drove to the Boulder Police Department on 33rd Street and asked to file a report. The officer at the front desk looked skeptical when I explained I wanted to report stolen firewood, but when I showed him my evidence, his expression changed. "This is actually pretty clever," he said, flipping through my photos. "You marked every piece, every single one," I confirmed. "I have about 150 pieces left in my yard, all marked the same way. And I can show you at least 50 pieces in her yard with my marks clearly visible under UV light." "And she is your HOA president?" "Yes. She has been citing me for violations and collecting fines for months. Meanwhile, she has been trespassing on my property and stealing from me. The officer nodded and called over a detective named Martinez, who handled property crimes. Detective Martinez was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude. He listened to my story, examined my evidence, and asked detailed questions about the timeline. "Here is the thing," Martinez said. "This is definitely prosecutable if your evidence holds up, but I need to verify it myself. Would you be willing to show me the wood in your yard and then accompany us to verify the wood at her residence?" "Absolutely," I said. Detective Martinez and another officer, a younger woman named Officer Chen, followed me home. In my backyard, I showed them my remaining wood stack and demonstrated the UV marks with my blacklight. Every piece glowed with my initials. "This is solid," Martinez said, making notes. "Now we need to see if those marks match what is at the suspect's residence." We drove to Patricia's house in 2 separate vehicles. It was around 11 in the morning on a Monday, and I knew Patricia usually worked from home in her position as a real estate agent. Her Lexus was in the driveway. Martinez and Chen walked up to the front door and knocked. I stayed by the police vehicle, watching from a distance. Patricia answered the door, and I could see her confusion and concern as Martinez showed her his badge and explained why they were there. She pointed at me and said something I could not hear, her face turning red. Martinez remained calm, asking her questions. The conversation went on for several minutes, and then Patricia reluctantly led them around to her side yard where the fire pit and wood stack were located. I watched as Martinez used what looked like a police-grade UV light to examine the firewood. Even from where I stood, I could see the green glow from multiple pieces. Martinez took photos with an official camera, documenting each marked piece. Officer Chen wrote notes on a tablet. Patricia was talking rapidly, gesturing with her hands. Her body language was defensive, angry. Martinez kept his professional demeanor, continuing to document the evidence. After about 20 minutes, they walked back to the front of the house. Martinez said something to Patricia that made her face go pale, and then he and Chen returned to where I waited. "Every piece we examined has your marks," Martinez said. "That is approximately 53 pieces of wood with your initials clearly visible under UV light. Based on the evidence, we have probable cause. We are going to arrest her for theft and criminal trespassing." I felt a surge of vindication mixed with disbelief. This was actually happening. Patricia Whitmore, the self-righteous HOA tyrant, was going to be arrested. "What happens now?" I asked. "We will take her into custody and process her. You will need to provide a formal statement at the station. The district attorney will review the case and decide whether to prosecute. Given the clear evidence and the fact that she trespassed on your property repeatedly to commit the theft, I think they will move forward." I watched as Martinez and Chen returned to Patricia's front door. When she answered, Martinez said something, and Patricia's entire demeanor changed. She started shouting, her voice carrying across the yard. "This is ridiculous, over firewood. I am a respected member of this community. I know the mayor. I know the city council." "Madam, you need to calm down," Martinez said firmly. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." He continued reading her Miranda rights as Patricia continued to protest. Chen gently but firmly guided Patricia's hands behind her back and handcuffed her. Neighbors were starting to come out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. I saw Donna Mitchell from across the street standing on her lawn with her mouth open in shock. Tom Richardson, 2 houses down, was recording the whole thing on his phone. Patricia was placed in the back of the police vehicle, still protesting loudly. Martinez came over to me and handed me a business card. "Come by the station this afternoon around 2 to give your formal statement," he said. Bring all your documentation and receipts. This is going to be a pretty straightforward case, but we want everything properly documented. Thank you, I said, still feeling surreal about the whole situation. After the police left with Patricia, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Donna Mitchell hurried over. "Keith, what on earth just happened?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Patricia was stealing firewood from my backyard," I said. "I marked it with UV ink, found it at her house, and called the police." "No way," Donna said, her hand covering her mouth. "Patricia." "But she is always going on about rules and property values." "Yeah, well, apparently rules only apply to everyone else," I said. Tom Richardson walked over too, still holding his phone. "Man, I got the whole arrest on video. This is crazy. Patricia has been a nightmare as HOA president. Last month she tried to fine me because my grass was a quarter-inch too long." More neighbors gathered, and I found myself retelling the story multiple times. The general reaction was a mixture of shock and schadenfreude. It turned out Patricia had made enemies with nearly everyone in the neighborhood with her aggressive enforcement of HOA rules. Several people mentioned that they had suspected her of various hypocrisies, but never had proof. I went home and spent the next few hours organizing all my documentation. I had my original purchase receipt for the firewood, showing I bought 3 cords from Boulder Mountain wood supply for $590. I had photos of my original stack from October. I had the receipt for the UV ink and Blacklight. I had detailed notes about when I noticed wood missing and how much. And I had probably 50 photos showing the UV marks glowing under Blacklight on the wood at Patricia's house. At 2 o'clock, I went to the police station and met with Detective Martinez in a small interview room. He recorded my formal statement while I walked through the entire timeline in detail. He asked clarifying questions about how I stored the wood, how I secured my backyard, when I first noticed the theft, and how I came up with the idea to mark the wood with UV ink. "This is one of the more creative cases I have handled," Martinez said with a slight smile. "Most people would not think to do what you did. The UV marks make this case airtight. Without them, it would be your word against hers, and she could claim she bought similar wood from the same supplier or something. But with your initials marked on every piece, there is no ambiguity." "What will happen to her now?" I asked. "She will be formally charged with theft and criminal trespassing. Given the value of the stolen property and the fact that she trespassed multiple times, the DA will probably charge the theft as a Class 2 misdemeanor and the trespassing as a Class 3 misdemeanor. She will have to appear in court, and depending on her criminal history and how she pleads, she could face fines, restitution, community service, probation, or even jail time, though jail is unlikely for a first-time offender." "What about the HOA situation?" I asked. "That is civil, not criminal," Martinez said. "But I imagine there will be consequences once the other homeowners find out their president was arrested for stealing from a neighbor." I left the police station feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. I had never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live peacefully in my house and enjoy my wood stove without being harassed. Over the next few days, the news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Tom Richardson's video of Patricia's arrest somehow ended up on a local Facebook group, and it went viral in the Boulder community. The local news station, 9 News out of Denver, even picked up the story. "HOA president arrested for firewood theft" became a minor regional news story, perfect for the feel-good segment about justice being served. I started receiving messages from other homeowners in Pinecrest Meadows, thanking me for exposing Patricia. It turned out her reign of terror had affected nearly everyone. People shared stories of ridiculous fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, and what they felt was financial harassment. Several homeowners mentioned they had considered selling their houses just to escape the HOA situation. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following week. The HOA bylaws stated that if the president was unable to fulfill their duties, the vice president would take over temporarily. Our vice president was a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Foster, a reasonable woman in her late 60s who had always seemed uncomfortable with Patricia's aggressive style. I attended the meeting, which was packed with homeowners. The room at the community center was standing room only, with at least 60 people crammed in. Margaret opened the meeting looking nervous but determined. "I think we all know why we are here," Margaret said. "Patricia Whitmore is facing criminal charges and has resigned her position as HOA president, effective immediately. We need to discuss how to move forward as a community." There was a wave of murmuring through the crowd. Someone in the back started clapping, and others joined in. Margaret looked surprised but pleased. "I propose that we use this opportunity to review all of our HOA policies and fines," someone called out. I recognized him as Jerry Hammond, who lived on the next street over. Patricia used the HOA like her personal fiefdom. "We need to make sure that never happens again." "I agree," said another voice. It was Susan Torres, who lived directly across from Patricia. "I was fined $300 last year because Patricia did not like the color I painted my front door. The bylaws say nothing about door colors." "She just made up rules as she went along." Margaret nodded. "I understand everyone's frustration. I was often uncomfortable with how Patricia interpreted the guidelines, but as vice president, I did not have the authority to override her decisions. Now that I am acting president, I propose we form a committee to review all HOA rules and fines from the past 2 years and determine which ones were legitimate and which ones were overreach." The proposal passed unanimously. I was asked to join the review committee, along with 5 other homeowners who had been heavily targeted by Patricia's enforcement regime. Over the next several weeks, our committee met 3 times to review the records. What we found was shocking. Patricia had collected over $42,000 in fines over the past 18 months. Some of the fines were legitimate, for actual violations like leaving trash cans out for days or having truly overgrown yards. But the vast majority were for minor aesthetic issues or interpretations of rules that did not actually exist in the written bylaws. Patricia had been pocketing a percentage of the fines as part of her compensation as HOA president. This was technically allowed under the bylaws, but the amount was supposed to be reasonable. She had been taking 30% of all fines collected, which meant she had personally profited over $12,000 from her aggressive enforcement. Our committee recommended that all fines from the past 18 months be reviewed individually, and that any fine that was not based on clearly written bylaws be refunded to the homeowner. We also recommended that the HOA president's compensation structure be changed to a flat annual stipend, not a percentage of fines collected, to remove the financial incentive for excessive enforcement. Both recommendations passed at the next general meeting with overwhelming support. I ended up getting back $650 in refunded fines. Other homeowners got back even more. Meanwhile, Patricia's criminal case moved forward. She hired an expensive attorney from Denver, a guy in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit who tried to argue that the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that Patricia had thought the wood was abandoned or had been given permission to take it. But the evidence was too strong. The UV marks with my initials, the photos, my testimony about the locked fence, and the timeline all painted a clear picture of intentional theft. The Boulder County District Attorney offered Patricia a plea deal. Plead guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of criminal trespassing. Pay restitution for the stolen wood plus court costs. Complete 100 hours of community service, and serve 1 year of probation. If she rejected the deal and went to trial, the DA threatened to add additional charges related to her abuse of her HOA position. Patricia's attorney advised her to take the deal. In late November, she appeared in Boulder County Court and entered a guilty plea. I was there to provide my victim impact statement. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Pamela Hernandez, listened to my statement about how Patricia's theft and harassment had affected my life and sense of security in my own home. Mrs. Whitmore, Judge Hernandez said, looking down at Patricia from the bench. You held a position of trust in your community. You were elected by your neighbors to uphold the rules fairly and reasonably. Instead, you abused that position for personal profit, and when that was not enough, you resorted to criminal behavior. You trespassed on your neighbor's property repeatedly and stole his possessions. This court takes property crimes seriously, especially when they involve a violation of trust. Patricia stood there in a conservative navy suit, her lawyer beside her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence and superiority that had always radiated from her was gone. Judge Hernandez accepted the plea deal but added additional terms. Patricia would have to complete anger management classes and write a formal apology to me and to the HOA community. She was also ordered to pay me $827 in restitution, which included the value of the stolen wood plus my expenses for the UV ink, Blacklight, and time spent documenting the theft. Do you have anything you would like to say to your victim? Judge Hernandez asked Patricia. Patricia glanced at me, and for a moment I saw real emotion in her eyes. Shame, maybe, or regret. But when she spoke, her voice was flat. I apologize for my actions, she said, the words sounding rehearsed. It was wrong, and I take full responsibility. It was not much of an apology, but I did not care anymore. I just wanted this to be over. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the cold November air. Detective Martinez was waiting in the lobby. Good outcome, he said, shaking my hand. Justice was served. Thank you for taking me seriously, I said. I was not sure anyone would care about stolen firewood. Theft is theft, Martinez said, and you did excellent work documenting everything. Made our job easy. I drove home feeling like a weight had been lifted. The legal process was done. Patricia had been held accountable. The HOA was being reformed. I could finally just live my life. When I got back to Pinecrest Meadows, I noticed something different. Several of my neighbors were outside doing yard work, and they waved and smiled at me as I drove past. Donna Mitchell was putting up Halloween decorations that were probably not HOA approved, but nobody cared anymore. Tom Richardson had painted his mailbox a bright red color that Patricia would have fined him for instantly. There was a sense of freedom in the neighborhood that had not existed before. People were no longer walking on eggshells, worried about citations for every minor thing. The HOA still existed, and still enforced reasonable rules about property maintenance and noise, but the atmosphere of fear and arbitrary enforcement was gone. I pulled into my driveway and got out of my truck. My remaining firewood was still neatly stacked in the backyard, every piece marked with my UV initials, even though I did not need the marks anymore. Patricia's restitution check had arrived the week before, and I had used the money to order another half-cord of wood to replace what she had stolen. That evening, I built a fire in my wood stove for the first time that season. As I watched the flames catch and grow, I thought about how strange the past few months had been. I never imagined that buying firewood would lead to a criminal investigation and the downfall of an abusive HOA president. But that is what happened. The fire crackled and popped, filling my living room with warmth. Biscuit lay on the rug beside me, content. Outside, the first snow of the season was starting to fall, covering Pinecrest Meadows in a clean white blanket. Over the following months, life in the neighborhood continued to improve. Margaret Foster was officially elected as the new HOA president, and she implemented a whole new system of checks and balances. Any fine over $50 now had to be approved by a majority vote of a 3-person board, not just the president. All rules had to be based on clearly written bylaws, not personal interpretation. And homeowners could appeal any citation through a formal process that involved neutral arbitration. The changes were not just procedural. The whole culture of the HOA shifted. Instead of being an enforcement agency looking for violations, it became what it was supposed to be: a community organization that maintained common areas, organized neighborhood events, and handled genuine issues like snow removal and street repairs. In December, the HOA hosted a holiday party at the community center. It was the first social event in years that did not feel mandatory or stressful. People actually wanted to attend. There were cookies and hot cider, a white elephant gift exchange, and Christmas carols played on a Bluetooth speaker. Kids ran around playing while adults chatted and laughed. I brought Biscuit, who was a hit with the children. Donna Mitchell came over with a plate of homemade fudge. "Keith, I just want to thank you again," she said. "I know this whole thing was probably stressful for you, but you did something important. You stood up to a bully, and now all of us are better off for it." "I just wanted my firewood back," I said with a laugh. "Well, you got a lot more than that," she said. "You gave us our neighborhood back." I looked around the room at my neighbors, people I had barely known a year ago. There was Tom Richardson talking with Jerry Hammond about organizing a neighborhood watch program, but a real one, not Patricia's version where she just spied on everyone. There was Susan Torres and her husband dancing badly to Jingle Bell Rock while their kids laughed at them. There was Margaret Foster chatting with a young couple who had just moved in, welcoming them properly instead of handing them a list of rules and restrictions. This was what a community was supposed to feel like. Not perfect, but real. Not controlled, but cooperative. I even received Patricia's court-ordered written apology in mid-January. It arrived in my mailbox in a plain white envelope with no return address. The letter was typed, formal, and completely impersonal. She apologized for stealing my property and for trespassing on my land. She acknowledged that her actions were wrong and that she had violated my trust as a neighbor and HOA president. She hoped I could forgive her in time. I read it once and then filed it away. I did not forgive her, not really, but I also did not feel angry anymore. She was a sad person who had used her small amount of power to feel important, and when that was not enough, she had resorted to taking things that were not hers. She would have to live with the consequences of her choices. Patricia ended up moving out of Pinecrest Meadows in February. A for sale sign appeared on her lawn, and within a month the house sold. I heard through the neighborhood rumor mill that she moved to Arizona to live with her sister, trying to start fresh somewhere nobody knew about her criminal record. The house was bought by a family with 3 young kids who seemed nice and normal. They introduced themselves to all the neighbors and asked about good schools and pediatricians. The wife mentioned that they were excited to use the fire pit in the backyard. "The previous owner left a bunch of firewood," she said. "We were not sure if it was part of the sale or what." "You should probably get rid of that and buy new wood," I said. That wood has a bad history." She looked confused, and I just smiled and changed the subject. Spring came to Colorado, bringing green grass and wildflowers to the foothills. I stopped using my wood stove and spent more time outdoors with Biscuit, hiking the trails around Boulder and enjoying the mountain views. The HOA was quiet, functional, and boring in the best possible way. I paid my regular dues and received monthly newsletters about upcoming community events and minutes from board meetings. There were no citations, no fines, no surprise enforcement actions. In May, I attended another HOA meeting to vote on whether to upgrade the playground equipment in the common area park. It was a mundane discussion about rubber mulch versus wood chips, about swing set materials and slide heights and budget considerations. It was incredibly boring, and it was exactly what an HOA meeting should be. The measure passed, and we all went home. I grilled burgers on my back deck that evening and invited Donna and her husband over for dinner. We ate and talked and laughed as the sun set behind the flatirons, painting the sky orange and pink. "You know, I was thinking about selling last year," Donna said. "The HOA situation was so toxic, and Patricia made me feel like a criminal for the stupidest things. But now I am glad I stayed. This is a good place to live again." "It really is," I agreed. Later that night, after my guests left and I was cleaning up the kitchen, I thought about the whole bizarre situation one more time. I had moved to Colorado looking for peace and mountain views and a quiet life. Instead, I had found myself in the middle of a property crime investigation, had helped bring down a corrupt HOA president, and had accidentally become a minor local hero in the Boulder community. The firewood that started everything was long gone, burned in my stove or hauled away. But the lessons remained. I learned that sometimes standing up for yourself, even over something as simple as stolen firewood, can make a real difference. I learned that careful documentation and creative problem solving can overcome even clear power imbalances. I learned that communities can heal and change when people refuse to accept toxic leadership. Most importantly, I learned that invisible UV ink really does show up under police blacklights, and that small acts of preparation can have enormous consequences. I ordered another 3 cords of firewood in October for the upcoming winter, properly seasoned and delivered. I stacked it neatly in my backyard, covered it with my heavy tarp, and this time I did not mark it with UV ink. I did not need to. Patricia was gone, the neighborhood was different, and I finally felt secure in my own home. The first cold night of November, I built a fire in my wood stove. The flames caught quickly, and soon my living room was warm and comfortable. Biscuit curled up on his favorite spot on the rug. I poured myself a bourbon and settled into my armchair with a book. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, the first real storm of the season. Inside, everything was warm and peaceful. The fire crackled softly, the whiskey was smooth, and my home finally felt like mine again. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered if she ever thought about the firewood that had been her undoing. Did she regret stealing it? Did she realize how unnecessary and petty it was? Or did she still feel entitled, still believe that rules only applied to other people? It did not matter anymore. She was gone, her power was gone, and the community she had tried to control had reclaimed itself. Justice had been served not just by the courts, but by the collective action of neighbors who decided they deserved better. The snow fell harder outside, big flakes swirling in the streetlight. Inside my warm house, with my dog sleeping peacefully and my fire burning bright, I felt something I had not felt in years: complete contentment. No anxiety about HOA violations, No worry about citations or fines. No feeling of being surveilled in my own home. Just peace. That is worth more than any amount of firewood could ever be worth. But I was still glad I got my restitution check, and I was especially glad that Detective Martinez had taken my case seriously. The Boulder Police Department had proven that no theft is too small to matter, no victim too unimportant to deserve justice. As I sat there watching the fire, I realized the whole experience had changed me. I was less naive now, more aware that bad people exist even in nice neighborhoods, that positions of authority can be abused, that sometimes you have to fight for what is right even when it seems easier to just pay the fine and move on. But I also learned that most people are good, that communities can come together when it matters, and that creative solutions to problems can be found if you are willing to think outside the box. Nobody expects someone to mark their firewood with UV ink, but it was exactly the right solution for exactly that problem. The fire burned down to glowing coals. I added another log, watching the flames lick up around it. This wood was honest wood, purchased fairly, stored legally, and used by its rightful owner. It represented everything that had been wrong and was now right about my situation in Pinecrest Meadows. Tomorrow I would wake up and work from home, take Biscuit for a walk, maybe chat with my neighbors, live my quiet life. There would be no drama, no citations, no theft. Just normal, boring, wonderful everyday life in a functional community. And if anyone ever tried to steal from me again, I had a bottle of UV ink and a Blacklight ready. I also had Detective Martinez's card in my wallet and the knowledge that the system, when presented with clear evidence, really does work. But mostly I had peace. And that was all I ever wanted. The snow continued to fall, blanketing Boulder in white. Inside my home, the fire kept burning, every piece of wood exactly where it belonged, warming the house I had worked so hard to make into a true home. The nightmare with Patricia was over. The neighborhood had been transformed. Justice had been done. Sometimes the smallest acts of theft lead to the biggest consequences. Sometimes standing up for yourself over something as simple as firewood can change an entire community. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. I finished my bourbon and headed upstairs to bed, Biscuit following at my heels. Tomorrow was another day in Pinecrest Meadows, but it would be a good day. They all would be from now on. The firewood Karen was gone. The neighborhood was free. And somewhere in my garage, a bottle of UV ink sat on a shelf. A reminder that preparation, documentation, and a little creativity can overcome even the most determined thief. I slept well that night, as I did every night now. My home was secure, my neighbors were friends, and my firewood stayed exactly where I put it. Justice glows green under blacklight, and it feels absolutely wonderful.